now, guys, welcome back. Welcome back to my second handmade lure making / gear making tutorials. In this video, I'm going to show you guys how I make my jig rods. This is a rod I made last year. This is one of the first rods I made. This is a 32-inch ultralight. I have this paired with a 13 Fishing Black Betty 6061, and it's been a pretty great rod so far. And I'm going to walk you guys through the steps on how I make these. I've made 4 jig rods and 4 open water rods. So I'm going to walk you guys through this rod that I'm building today. And I think what I'm going to be building is a 26-inch ultralight on a fiberglass noodle blank. This is a very light sensitive blank. So I think I'm going to make one out of this blank. And I'm going back and forth about what type of reel setup I'm going to use. All the jig rods I've made up to this point have been made with this handle reel seat setup. I'm thinking I may try using one of these. I'll just show you guys real quick, because this is going to be primarily just a panfish rod. So this one, so I'm thinking I may try this one, because I haven't tried this type of reel seat yet. I'm thinking I may try this one, just keep it real basic for today. This isn't the actual blank I'm going to use, because I'm going to have to ream some of these components out to make the noodle blank fit. But I think we'll go this route, just keep it simple for this video. And for the next jig rod making video I do in a couple weeks, I'm going to be putting this rod together. This is a 36-inch medium light, so this is quite a bit beefier than the ultralights. I'm going to do a split grip pattern. These are the wind foam grips. I'm going to paint this tube here Chartreuse. May do a little bit of paint on the reel seat, I'm not sure. So nothing's sealed down on this, that's why everything looks kind of funny. And I just roughly spaced out the guides here, just so you guys could roughly see what it would look like. So this is going to be my next video. Hoping to have this one out in a week or two. But I think for this one, we're just going to do this handle with the 26 ultralight noodle blank, which I have right here. Alright, so real quick before we get started, I'm going to just roughly run over what you're going to need to do a jig rod. Then I'm going to go into more detail as we're actually into that specific step. So the first thing you need is a blank. You can find these anywhere from eBay to rod making sites. You can find these ice fishing blanks pretty much anywhere. So then you need your handle components, you know, whatever you need for a handle. The options are endless. As you can see, I have just a couple here laid out. Then you need your reel seat. Again, the options are pretty much endless. This is pretty much a spinning seat. You can use it with these type of inlines. You don't need the trigger on it like you would for a casting seat for an open water reel. So for the most part, these spinning seats you can use pretty much straight across the board. This is a split grip. Again, you can make these as fancy as you want. You need your guides, obviously. Guides can be anywhere from $1 a guide up to $20 a guide. And these are Fuji guides. I pretty much run Fuji straight across the board. And this is a Fuji reel seat. I like the Fuji reel seats, but when it comes to reel seats, they're all pretty decent. So another thing you need, so I always keep a couple of these arbors on hand. So what these do is these take up the space of these reel seats here. As you can see, you know, this little skinny ice rod blank, you know, if you put that in there, you either need to wind the tape to it to build up an arbor so it fits in there snug, or you can use these arbors that fill that void a little better. Still have to do a little bit of taping to get that tight, but as you can see, it trims that space down substantially. So having some arbors on hand is always a good thing to have. I made these reamers. You'll need some reamers. All this is sandpaper. I cut it into thin strips and wound it on an old fishing rod. Because why? These are important because this is the blank we're going to be using. This is a noodle blank, and the butt section of these are pretty thick, and you can see it's not going to go through this cork. It's way too big, so I'm going to have to ream this cork out. And sometimes you have to ream your arbors when you're doing like open water rods. So next thing you need is some rod paste, some rod epoxy. I use Pro Paste. This is what you need to glue your arbor into your reel seat and your rod into your arbor. just like that. So you glue both surfaces, and that'll lock down solid. You can use 2-part epoxy, but I hear it's not as stable as this stuff. So over time, I heard the 2-part epoxy, like the DevCon 2-ton, I heard that will break down. I personally haven't experienced that myself because I don't use it, but that's what I've heard. Then you need whatever thread you want. Again, you can go basic. They make some really expensive thread that has 4 or 5 different colors. So when you wind it on, it looks pretty cool. And next thing you need is your thread finish. This is a 2-part epoxy. This is a flexible epoxy. So once you wind your guides on, you put that on, spin it for 10 hours or so, and it protects your thread wrap. So another thing to have is tape. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes you'll need to take your blank and wrap some tape on it to make a nice tight fit into whatever you're gluing. So it's good to have some of this on hand. It's good to have some nail polish remover on hand, because when you're gluing with this stuff on, you don't want to leave this on your real seats. You don't want to leave it on your cork, because once it dries, it's on there. So having this on hand is good. I always keep a spare rag around with this, so you can just wipe off the excess glue there. Tip tops, just talk real quick about them. With ice fishing rods, you need a good size tip top. This is a size 8. If you go too small of a tip top, it'll freeze up and cause you a bunch of problems. So I like to run an 8. Some people run a 10, but I have good luck with a size 8. This is a China marker. This is a real greasy pen. So what you do is you mark your where you're putting your components, and that shows up nice and good, so you know where you're putting stuff, and it just wipes off. It doesn't damage your blank at all. So I'd say these China pens are pretty much a must. All right, oh, it's right here in front of me. Next thing you need is this tip-top adhesive. This looks like a hot glue stick, but what you do is you heat this up, put some on your blank, and put your tip-top on. And once it cools, that tip-top's not going anywhere. And another thing you're going to need is a rod turner, which I don't have set up yet. We'll see that a little later on in the video. What I have is a small barbecue motor set up on a wood stand that I made, and you put that into the barbecue turner, and it just turns that rod slowly at I think 2 revolutions a minute, so it turns pretty slow. Otherwise, your thread finish would just drip and sag, and you'd have a terrible looking rod. Alright, so I think that's the basics of it, guys. I can't think of anything else right off the top of my head. If something comes up, I'll explain it in more detail once we actually hit that step. But I think that'll do for the quick rundown. So we're going to get started on this rod. I'll show you guys how we start this. Again, I'm going to be using this 26-inch noodle blank. This is just a fiberglass noodle blank. It's very, very sensitive. And we're going to be running this handle here. So the first step in building any rod, whether it's an ice rod, an open water rod, a saltwater rod, a musky rod, a bass rod, a trout rod, you always find the spine of a blank. And what the spine is where this blank, under pressure, is going to snap into place and stay there. So I'll put some tape on in a minute, but what you do is you load the rod up, you bend it. So I'm bending with this hand, and I'm going to push the rod with this hand. So we're going to bend the rod, I'm going to push with my right hand, and that rod's going to snap in place. I'm going to do it a few times. So bending here, I'm going to push with my right hand, and it snapped into place there. And that snapped into place there. So I'm going to mark this side here, because this is the side where the spine is. It's very important to find the spine of the rod, because if you don't, what will happen is if you put your guides offset to the spine, which is this line right here. So say if I put my guides coming off this side, under load, this rod is going to want to twist. Whether you're setting the hook on a fish or reeling a fish in, this rod's not going to act quite right. So you always want to find the spine, and I'm going to double check it. I have my mark on there, so I'm just going to double check. I'm going to load it, twist it, and white side landed up. So there's my spine. I'm going to put a little bit of tape on it so you guys can see a little better. I'm going to put it with the tape pointing up. Okay, so we're just going to wrap this up so you guys can get a little better of a visual. So we have the white line marking the spine. We have this blue tape pointing up, and this blue tape is pretty much simulating where my guides would be. And it also is giving you guys a little better of a visual. So I'm going to load, push with my right hand, and that lands up. I'm going to start with this down. I'm going to give it some pressure, and it pops right into place. That's your spine. And I double, triple, quadruple check it. Alright, so this spine here will work with this type of reel or a spinning reel. So what's going to happen, like I said earlier, is I'm going to put my guides orienting just like this tape is. So my guide train will run right up this way, facing you guys. So the spine of this rod is going to be going down this way, with them guide trains going the direction of the spine. If I was making a bait casting rod for the summertime, or even for an ice fishing rod, it would be the exact opposite. Instead of having the guides on this side of the rod, I would have the guides facing me this way. So my guide train would be facing me going this way. So the spine of the rod, as it reflects this way, my guides would be on top. That's probably a little confusing, but when you get your blank, if you're making a rod, once you play around with that, you'll kind of get to see what that's like. And once you actually see it for yourself, it clears it up. So I was a little confused when I first started doing this, but my first rod, it was much more clear once I actually had the rod and I was able to play around with the spines. So now that we found the spine, we're going to just do a rough fit of the components. Just for this sake, I got to take the tape off, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some extra white onto this blank, because what can happen is the more you're manipulating this rod when you're doing the build, you can lose that little strip of white. So I make sure that there's a good strip of white on there, because you don't want to get 3/4 of the way through your build and realize that you lost your white. So I try to put a little extra on just to be safe. Alright, so now we're going to do a rough fit of the reel seat. This arbor is a little smaller than the reel seat, so I'm going to try to get this so it's centered right in the middle there. It doesn't have to be exact, but I like it to be rough center. And that's rough center right there. And this butt cap is fine. I won't have to ream that because I'll just have the rod sit right on top of that. Okay, what I'm going to do is just mark right here where this is going to slide down to. So again, I'm going to have to ream this because that's as far as that goes. So I need to do a light sand in there. So I'm going to use my small reamer, and I'm going to ream this slowly. You don't want to over ream because it just causes you more work afterwards. So what I'm doing is just slowly working this up into the cork there, and I'll probably actually have to go up a size, but you always need to start with a small one and then work your way up. Alright, this is the next size, and this one I'm going to be careful with because we're not going to have to do a lot on this one. So you want this to be snug on the rod, but you don't want it to be snug to the point where you don't get any glue in there. Alright, let's see what that looks like. Okay, there we go. That's perfect. That slid right down, but it's not too tight that it's going to remove the glue as I put the glue down. So the handle is pretty much ready to assemble. I'm just going to clean up this workspace a little bit. Get these shavings out of here. Because anytime you're working with epoxy, that epoxy will pick up any shaving of cork, any dirt, any dust. So anytime I'm working with epoxy, I make sure I have a really clean surface. So it just saves you a headache down the road. So I'm just going to wipe this down with a damp rag. I want to make sure I get everything up, and we'll get this reel seat put together. Alright, so just for the purpose of this next step, I'm going to put this tape back on, just so I can give you guys a little better of a visual orientation of what I'm doing. Because this next step is pretty important. Again, this blue is representing my spine. It's also representing where my guides are going to go, just for visual purposes. You obviously want your reel seat lining up with your guides. This is just an old reel that I cut the actual reel part off. So what I do is I put this on, line this up to the white line, which is representing the spine, and the tape also gives you a visual reference. So we're gonna get gluing. I'm gonna leave this tape on. Just gonna take this reel off. Alright, so now what we're going to do is I'm just going to put a little mark right here where this cork is going to end. And I'm just going to do one quick check of this reel seat. I may put a little bit of tape. So as you can see, it goes from a really thick butt and it narrows down substantially. Well, actually, I'm going to leave it. That's okay. I was going to ream the rear end a little bit, but that's fitting fine. There's no problem with that at all. So what we're gonna do is get the paste ready. This is a two-part. This is an A and B. It needs to be a 50-50 mix, and I don't measure it. I just do a rough 50-50. The manufacturer just says a rough 50-50. And what I always do is I always like to maybe do a little more than I actually need, just because I don't like to have to run out and worry about going back and mixing more. And you have plenty of working time with this. I think it's right around a 45-minute work time. And you should mix this for about 2 minutes. So I'm not going to use the same end I use this one. I'm going to flip over, grab some from the other end. Just going to do a rough look, make sure it's roughly 50-50. And if you can see that, that's close enough for me. We're going to mix that together. I'm going to clean off one end so I don't get my hands all sticky. And another good thing to have on hand, which I forgot to mention, is some paper towels. I ran out because we're doing some home renovations and we've been using that to clean a lot. So I ran out of paper towels, but them are very handy to have. So we're going to mix this. I'm going to try to keep this all in this one area. So we're going to mix for 2 minutes, then I'll catch back up with you. And you want to try to mix this thoroughly. You don't want to leave any streaks in it. You want this to be all one color. See, it's kind of a light brown color. I forgot to mention earlier, is I like to do a light sand on the blank down here. That just gives the glue something extra to stick to, because these blanks are pretty smooth. So I'm just going to do a light sand from here down. And this is just a light sand, just enough to add a little bit of grab. I'm just going to rough that up just a little, because you don't want these twisting. It's nothing worse than a real seat that twists. Alright, you guys probably won't see it, but there's some grooves in there. I weren't actually sanding. I was more taking the paper and running it, creating grooves all up and down the blank. So that looks good. If you take your nail and you turn your blank, you want to feel some bumps, which that has plenty. And that just gives the glue something to grab onto. So what we're going to do is we're going to glue the butt section in first. Then we're just going to slide this reel seat down to the butt seat, because that pretty much just matches it up perfect. And most of these reel seats, you want to check your reel seat. Probably won't be able to see it, but if you guys can see inside that, there's little grooves in there. Again, it just catches the glue so it doesn't spin quite as much. So you don't have to worry about scraping the inside of these. So what we're going to do is just take a little bit of this glue. Going to put it in here. You don't need much. Just want to run that around, make sure it's even. Put your butt cap in. And as I'm putting it in, I'm just twisting it, and feel like maybe there can be a little more glue in there. Alright, so we're going to twist as we're going in. And that felt much better. That initial time I didn't feel like there was enough glue in there. So as you can see, there's a little bit of excess glue. Again, that's where the paper towels come in handy. Just going to wipe that off. And sometimes you can just get away with using a paper towel or a rag. Sometimes you need to put the acetone to it, because these can pop off. So I'm just going to put a little bit of tape on there, because you don't want that pushing around. And you want to try your best to not get the glue on your hands, because if you get that epoxy glue on your hands, it's going to get all over the place. So the less you can get on your hand, the better. Okay. So just taping this in place. That'll save a little bit of a headache. You just don't want to have to go back and have to re-glue and re-clean and clean the surface. So that's not going to move. So we're going to drop the arbor in. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to get some glue down there and then slide the arbor onto the glue. Okay, so I'm going to take the arbor, I'm going to push it into the glue. As we're going, we're going to turn. That just helps to move that glue around. And just as a security, I'm putting my finger down here. And that feels really good. Just going to use this to push down. Perfect. Okay, that's glued. The arbor's in. Okay, now we're ready to drop the blank in. Just going to put some glue on the blank. Drop it in the arbor. Spin it down as we go. And last thing we'll have to glue is that up there. And you want to get a good amount of glue. You don't want to skimp on the glue, because if you skimp, just could create a problem down the road. So you want a good amount of glue. This glue is going to set into that arbor, and once it's set, you know, this isn't going to move at all. So that's a fair amount of glue, because we had such a tight fit with this arbor. That's going to work. That's going to work perfect. So I'm just spinning as I go, and I can actually feel it, you know, kind of almost like a suction effect down there, and that's down to the base. Alright, so now we're going to glue this last piece of cork on, and you don't need a lot with this one, but you want enough so it glues in, but you don't need to gob this on like you did the other ones. See that? It's a fair amount of glue. Now this part gets a little tricky, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of tape up here on the threads, just so I don't have to worry about that glue moving down onto the threads. Alright, so that'll keep it off the majority of the threads. I'm going to take this and we're just going to slowly turn this in. You will have a little bit come out, and what I do is I'll work it back and forth a little bit just to make sure you get a good disbursement of that glue. I'm going to get the bulk of this off with the tape on, and then we'll take the tape off and clean it up a little better. So you can see a little bit of that got on the threads. Not the end of the world, but I'm going to try my best to clean that up. Alright, so the last thing we got to drop on is this winding check. So I've got to take the tape off. So what I do is just take a little bit of glue, turn it around the blank. Once I see a nice bead going around, that's normally all you need. I've never had a winding check move. And I'm going to use this pen to push this down because I don't want to get my hands gluey. And I can see that pulling some of that glue down, which is perfect. And I'm just going to flatten that out. And that winding check is in place. Just got to do a little bit of glue cleanup. That winding check's good. What I'm doing now is just giving it a quick go over. Seeing if I missed anything cleanup wise. Everything looks good. I don't see any glue. So now's the important part. You know, the reel's all set. Now we got to turn the orientation of the rod so the spine meets where the reel is going to be coming. Alright, so what I'm doing now is I'm lining this rod up to how this rod is going to cure. So this is where my reel would be. I'm looking at my spine, and that looks perfect. I'll look down this way. Yep, that's good. That rod is ready to cure. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean the blank. There's a little bit of glue got up here on the blank, and that's ready to go. And just as a precaution, something I do is I will just do one final check to make sure nothing slid around. That's all good. So one thing I do, because you have to let this sit for about an hour, is, you know, I do my triple quadruple check. I'll put just a little bit of piece of tape going from the reel seat to the blank. That'll just help to keep it from spinning. Not that I ever think it would, but I don't like to have to worry about it for an hour. I like to be able to leave it and just let it do its thing. So that rod's ready to go. That rod's ready to cure. I'm just going to leave this sitting here. I'm going to try not to bump it. Not going to try to move it. We're going to leave it for an hour. I'm going to come back and check, and hopefully it'll be cured enough so I can put the guide train on. So we'll catch up with you guys in just about an hour. Alright guys, so we're just about an hour, probably actually closer to an hour and a half. So we're going to check and see how this rod looks. It should be good to put the guides on. So what I'm going to do is just check the cork. So if you can spin the cork, then it's not ready to put the guides on. There's a little bit of travel on the cork. So we're going to have to let this sit for another couple minutes. This cork here seems like it's pretty solid, but that one I could move. It's just about to the point of being able to put the guides on, but I'm going to give it another half hour or so. I don't want to get it up onto the rack, winding guides, and having the orientation change. So all it takes is just a little bit for that to go off center, and it'll screw your spine up. So I'm just going to let this sit for another half hour or so, and it should be ready to go. Alright, so it's been about a half hour, and this top one is pretty well solid. I mean, there's a little micro movement, but not to the point that I'm worried about it. Just as a little extra insurance, I'm going to put some tape back on the blank. I don't think I really need to, but I always try to be extra cautious. But we've gone this far, so I just want to be a little extra cautious. So that's just a little extra security. I don't think it would move, but better to be safe than sorry. Alright guys, so as you can see, this is my very basic thread wrapping station. This is what I use to wrap my my guides on. Very basic, just made it out of some scrap wood. I can do anything from an ice fishing rod all the way up to an open water rod. I did make this so it's adjustable, so I can slide these back and forth. And I have a couple floaters. Actually, they're behind the camera. I have a couple that I can just kind of set wherever I need to. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to put the guides on. I think this is probably the most tedious part of building a rod, is getting the guides on. But once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy. So we're going to get right into this step. I'm not going to do much talking, so I'll talk you guys through it as we go. And I'm going to try my best to get you guys right up close so you guys can see. Sometimes these GoPros don't do well up close focusing, but I'm going to try my best to get you guys right up close to what I'm doing here. Alright, so this next part, guys, I got you as close as I could. I'm not sure how much of my head's going to be showing, but this next part is very important. You want to make sure your hands are nice and clean. If your hands are all oily and dirty, it's going to get onto your thread, and you know, most threads are going to show whatever's on your hands. So you want to make sure your hands are nice and clean. I'm going to try my best to show you guys what I'm doing where we're so close. But first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the tip top on, and I'm going to do just a light fit of the tip top. I like to do the tip top first just because it gives me a good reference when I'm actually putting the guides on. Alright, there's a couple ways you can do this tip top adhesive. What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to heat it up. I'm going to get a little bit on my blank, hoping I'll be able to get the tip top on before it dries. Oftentimes you have to go through and reheat it again. So hopefully that's still, yeah, that's good. It does get a little stringy, and I can tell that already dried. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to actually hit the blank. I'm just going to keep it away from it. And we're going to get the tip top on. Perfect. So now I'm just going to give the tip top just a little bit of heat, enough so I can spin it and make sure it's seated fine, which it is. And that actually landed pretty darn good. Just going to do a quick adjustment. And all you need to do is just heat this up real quick, spin it to whatever your adjustment is, and it should be good to go. Just doing a quick check for the sake of what I'm doing. Alright, that's fine. That looks good. And my plan for this rod is, I'm thinking I'm going to do 4 guides, possibly 3. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from a 16 down to a 12, down to 2 8s, then my tip top. I may run 3. So what I'm going to do is just do a rough layout of these with a piece of tape, and we'll see what it looks like. So this is where it's always challenging. I could put a 4th guide on that. Yeah, I think 4 guides will probably be okay. I was almost thinking maybe I was just going to put 3 on, but I'm thinking 4 will work fine. Alright, so there you have it. There's a rough layout. And what I'm going to do is just kind of play around with the alignment of these. That actually looks pretty good right there. I actually like the looks of that. Alright, so now what I'm doing is I'm just going to do a quick check with some line. I'm going to give the rod a little bit of a flex. Just make sure everything looks good, because you don't want your line to come in contact with your blank. So I'm just going to hold the line down here, give the rod a little bit of a flex, see how the rod acts, and that looks pretty good. I think that's good. I think it's lined up good. Don't have to worry about the line hitting the blank at all. So I think we're going to probably mark that out right there. I may move this one down just a little. Alright, so I like the looks of that. I think that'll work fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the bottom of each one of these feet. So all I have to do is just go in and line up the bottom of the foot to where my marks are. Alright, so this next step is an important one, because we're going to start actually wrapping the threads now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Dremel and I'm going to flatten this edge off a little more. Just saves you a little bit of a headache wrapping up. I'll explain that a little more in just a minute. So what I'm going to do is just take this, I'm going to grind a little bit of that foot off. Okay, so what you're trying to do is you're trying to create as small of a step from your blank up onto your guide when you're winding. You want to try to create as small of a step as you can. Sometimes your bigger guides, you really need to sand them down, but these ones you just need to do a little bit of a sand. Alright, so we're just about ready to throw some thread down on this. One thing you're going to need is a razor blade. I'll show you why in just a minute. I'm just going to keep a tag end here. I'll show you why in just a second. And what I always try to do is start with the guide as close to where it needs to be, so you just have to move it around less. Alright, so what we're going to do now is just going to take a small piece of tape. We're going to tape this tag end uphill towards the tip top. And we're going to take this thread and we're going to wind it down towards the reel seat. And we're going to save about 1/4 inch from the base of the guide foot to where this last turn is. And then we're going to keep turning, but I'm going to change the direction and I'm going to start turning back up towards the tip of the rod. And that locks in that last turn that I had showed you. So now we're actually reversing direction and we're going back up the rod. And what I'm doing is just trying to tighten these wraps down as I go. And what we're looking for is we're looking for a good 8 to 10 wraps. And then we're going to trim this tag end off that you can still see going up towards the top of the rod there. So there's about 10. I'm going to tighten my thread up. I'm going to get it right under the rod. And we're going to release this tag end. And because we locked it in with that locking wrap, we don't have to worry about it coming undone. So I'm just going to grab this and we're going to spin this so I can get a razor blade in there nice and flush. And we're going to cut this as close and as clean as we can. So I'm going to go over the guide wraps, little pressure, take my time, get as many as I can, and that should leave you with basically no fibers that you have to wrap over. So we're just going to continue up past that point, and if we made our step good enough, we should be able to wrap right up onto that guide foot, no problem. And I'm going to slow down once we get right at the base. Okay, so we're going to see how we did. Going to go nice and slow. What you want to do is get that one catch wrap there, and once you get that first one, the other one should fall right into place. If we didn't trim that down, this would not be going on quite as easy, and we're good. We're a couple wraps in there. So we're just going to carry on uphill towards the top of the rod. Alright, so we're going to start just tightening these wraps up a little bit. We got enough on there, we can take this tape off. Still want to be careful that you don't move it. Alright, so I just had that guide move just a little, so I'm going to be very careful. Okay, and I think we're doing pretty good. I think this guide foot spun a little bit. So before we do our final locking wrap, I'm going to tighten these down. And I'm going to come over here from the side. I'm going to do a quick look. And we're off center, so I'm just going to center that back up. And we're going to continue on. And I'll show you guys how to do a locking wrap. Alright, so we're getting to the point where we're going to start prepping for our locking wrap up here. What you want to do is you want to save 8 to 10 turns from the thread up to this point of the guide foot. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to take that spare piece of thread I showed you, fold it into a loop, and we're going to bring this up onto the back of the rod, and we're going to leave it there. And we're going to actually wind over that loop, and I'll show you why in just a second. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 wraps on top of that loop. Now this part's very important because we're finishing this wrap here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull a little bit of extra line. I'm going to pull a little bit of extra thread. I'm going to hold to keep the tension, and we're going to cut just below there. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to hold under here just so you guys can see. I'm going to pinch this wrap so it doesn't move. I'm going to put this wrap into this loop, pull it through. So the line went through this loop. I'm going to pull this tight, and I pulled this down to where it kind of locks into itself, and I'm pulling on the main thread again. Now what we're going to do is take these tags and we're going to pull this thread up through, and now I can, as you can see, freely move. All I need is about that much thread, so I'm just going to double, triple that, so we don't need to pull all this thread through. So just going to get a good grab on that, and we're going to pull that main line through them thread wraps, just like that. And I'm going to leave that for now in case I need to go back and then tighten it up after. But now we can take it off, inspect, and that actually lined up perfect. It's pretty rare that happens. So I'll show you guys one more. If you guys don't want to see that thread wrap again, you guys can just fast forward to whatever time's up here. But I'll show you guys one more wrap, and then it's the exact same all the way up. So I'll just show you guys this next one. Alright, so this next part can be a little challenging, because as you're working on this guide, you don't want to be bumping the one you already did. So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of figuring out what spacing I need so I can tie this one down fine and not have to worry about bumping the other guide. So I think that'll work. What I'm going to do is just remove a little bit of that paint so I don't have to worry about it getting up close to my guide foot there. And same thing, I'm going to take a little piece of tape, tie off uphill towards the top of the rod, and we're going to wind down towards the reel seat. We're going to leave a little bit of a room there between the thread and the guide foot, and what we're going to do is we're going to reverse direction, and we're going to tie, and we're going to wrap uphill towards the top of the rod, and this is what locks that wrap in. And I'm being very careful not to hit the one I already did. And we're going to stop right about there. That's about 5 or 8 wraps. So I try to get as close to 8 as I can. I'm going to remove the tape. And maybe get another wrap or 2 in there. Yeah, there we go. That'll work. So that's under the guide foot again. I tighten my thread up so I can leave it. So what we're going to do is lift up on this thread, nice and easy. Going to run this, and just nice and easy, going to run this back and forth so it cuts that nice and clean. Just like that. And now we're just going to wind up. Oh, I forgot to shave that guide foot down. I got so into the filming process, I forgot to do the guide foot. Alright, there we go. That should be a nice clean step. I normally do these all at once, but where I was talking about where they go, I didn't do it. And if we did a good job with the sand, that should line up pretty good and walk its way right up the foot. And as you can see, that tag end, that's because I had to go remove a few threads. Not ideal, but as you can see, it's laying down fine. Alright, we walked up that pretty good. Going the rest of the way up. I'm going to get about halfway up, then I'm going to take the tape off. If you take the tape off too soon, your guide can actually walk right out of the thread wraps, which you don't want. So I try to get about halfway up, tightening the thread ups as I go. Okay, so we're about halfway. I'm going to tighten my thread up, take the tape off. And what I'm going to do is do a quick spin of this guide, because I can see it's way off center there. This part you got to be really careful with. There, I can see that's close enough. I'm going to continue up, and sometimes you get a few thread wraps move like that happened right there, but I'll be able to buff them out a little bit later. Alright, so we're going to work our way up. Again, we're going to save about 8 to 10 wraps towards the top of the foot there. That'll just allow us to lock this in. Okay, that should be just about 8 wraps, plus or minus. So going back to another piece of scrap thread, I'm going to bring this right up on top. I'm going to leave that loop there, get everything lined up, and we're going to wrap on top of that. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 wraps right there. That's perfect. I'm going to take a little bit of thread. I'm going to pull down with this hand. We're going to trim. I'm going to go from the underneath so you guys can see. I'm going to block here so these thread wraps don't unravel. I'm going to put this main thread through the loop. I'm going to pull and hold the main thread. Now we're going to pull this loop just like that, so that locks it in. And I should be able to just pull that through. Didn't need to trim that because it weren't quite as much as the other one. And we're going to pull this, tighten it up just like that, and I'm going to leave that for now in case I need to go in and tighten it up after. I'm going to do a quick look, and for the sake of now, that looks pretty good. I'll go through and do a final tune afterwards. Alright, so I'm not going to show you these two because it's the exact same as the first two that we did. So I'm going to do these two off camera. Then when I'm ready to put the thread wrap on, I'll catch back up with you guys. Alright, there you have it, guys. There's all the guides. Nice and neat. So now what we got to do is just check to make sure they're all lined up right. Alright, so in this step, you got to double, triple, quadruple check that your guides are lined up right. Because once they start spinning, you're pretty much married to wherever these things sit. So I'm just going to find this, and just looking, and it'll look good. Alright, we're just about ready. Last thing we have to do is we got to marry all these threads together, and you can use what's called a burnishing tool. I just use like a backside to these little kid scissors, and what you do is just rub this nice and easy back and forth over the threads, and it just helps to blend them together a little better. They do make an actual burnishing tool, but anything that's smooth plastic will work fine. So I don't know if you can see, it just helps to make it look a little cleaner. And you do that on every guide. And it does help. You know, I didn't do this initially when I first started making my first couple rods, but I did after my second or third one, and I noticed a difference. It does help, you know, to mend these all together and make them look a little better. Okay, I think we're good. So what we're going to do is we're going to trim these tag ends off. We're going to take a little bit of time and make sure we cut these nice and flush, so we don't want any stragglers coming off the cut there, and we'll actually burn them down a little bit too. This rod is just about ready to turn. What I'm going to do, take a lighter, I'm just going to do some quick heat to burn up any of that nylon that may be hanging around, because this is nylon thread and sometimes you get some stragglers, and you don't want them into the clear coat. So that just helps to trim them. Alright, so the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put a little bit of a trim band here and maybe one up here, and this rod will be ready to get spinning. Like I said earlier, I feel like you can never check these too many times. I feel like you could check these 1,000 times and find a correction every time, but that looks pretty good to me. So I'll show you guys how to put the thread finish on now. Alright, so this is that grill rotisserie motor I was talking about. This is what's actually going to spin the rod. So what I do is I just clamp this onto what I was using before, and that holds it in place. Make sure this is tight. Alright, so that's tight. So what's going to happen, this is going to actually, that's designed for a little bigger of a... Okay guys, so my camera shut off, so I'm backtracking a little bit because I'm not sure what I lost. When you hit this on, it turns it, I think, around 2 revolutions a minute. So I realized something as I was doing this, that the prior setup I had is a little big for this smaller handle. It fits this style handle perfect, sits right in there nice and snug and turns it. But I'm going to have to build up this handle, probably just use some tape so it fits in there, because you got to make sure this is relatively centered in there. If it's off-centered, it's not going to turn right. So I think what I'm going to do is just take some tape and build up here a little bit. I think that's the quickest way to solve this little problem. Alright. Well, that last piece is getting me. Alright, let's see if that's any better. That'll work. That's perfect. Alright, so this next step's an important one. I'm going to go through and clean off all that China marker, because you don't want to forget to do that, because if you do and you put your thread wrap on, that epoxy is going to set that in there for the entire duration of this rod's life. So I try my best to clean everything up, try to get as much fingerprints off it as I can, because I don't want to trap anything in there and have to see it every time I fish. So just doing a double, triple check. Everything looks good. Alright guys, so I brought you in a little closer. We're going to be mixing up our flexible rod wrap. And it comes with these syringes, because you need to mix these a little more close than we did with the real paste there. And you don't need much of this, so I'm just going to do like 1.5 mils each one of the A and B. And you want to make sure there's no dust, there's no cat hair, dog hair in your finish, because it will stick right into the rod there. And these come with different colored syringes, so you don't have to worry about mixing them up. Because if you mix up the syringes, they will seal down on themselves. So there's 50-50, A side, B side. Show you guys there, probably can't see it that well. So we're going to mix this thoroughly for about 2 to 3 minutes. I'm going to mix this relatively slow, because the slower you mix it, the less bubbles that are in it. There's going to be some bubbles, but you want to try to get as little as you can. And you really want to make sure this is mixed up thoroughly. This is probably the most important part of the whole process, is making sure you get a good thread wrap. Because this is what's going to protect your guide wraps, and if this isn't cured all the way, it's going to be sticky and tacky. Okay, so that's just about 3 minutes on the dot. What I'm going to do is wipe this off, so I'll be able to repurpose this stir stick. So what I do to help the bubbles is I'm going to rotate this on its side, and I'm going to try to run this on the side of the cup, because as I'm getting everything ready, this will slide back down the cup, and the thinner this stuff is, the more the bubbles will pop. So as that settles down, it's going to pop some of the bubbles. So what we're going to do is just let that sit for about 5 minutes, and we'll put it on the guides. I'm going to turn your motor on, and you're going to see that spin nice and slow. That's what you want, about 2 revolutions a minute. Alright, so we're ready to get the finish on. Still some air bubbles in there, but them should work out as I'm actually applying it. I'm using this real soft brush here. This is way overkill. I realized I didn't have any craft brushes left. This is actually one of my oil painting brushes. I'm going to use this one. This is just a cheap one. Alright, so what we're going to do is just lightly coat each one of these guides. You can put too much on. If you put too much on, it will sag and drip. So I try my best to not do that. And just take your time. You have plenty of work and time with this epoxy. And what I'm doing is just making sure it's even. Move on to this next one. So you want just enough on this so it soaks into the threads, but not enough that it's actually running off and sagging. Okay, them look pretty good for now. I'm going to move on to this first one here. And with some of these bigger ones, I'll put a big glob on and just work it from the bottom. Because that's where this is going to want to settle from, is on the bottom. Because you want to make sure you get a nice layer in here. And you want to make sure you get 1/8 of an inch above and below each one of the thread wraps. Because if you don't protect that part of the thread wrap, you could lose it. Just making sure this is nice and even. And I'm just going to take a little bit off my brush. I'm going to trim this up because it's starting to sag a little bit. That one looks good. Try to bring you this way so you can see this one. And you want to try to make sure your rod's as level as you can. It's a little harder with these ice rods because they will bow, but you want to try to make sure it's as level as you can, because if you don't, the epoxy will run to whichever side is downhill. Alright, that one's looking good. Just going to clean my brush off a little. Check that one. That one's sagging just a little bit. Them both look good. This one's sagging just a little. Okay guys, we're just about done here. We got a nice even coat. We're going to let this spin for probably a good 8 hours. It's 2 o'clock right now, so I'll probably stop this around 10. And I'm just doing a quick double check. come back over to these ones here. Alright, I'm going to spend a little extra attention on this winding check. I like to make sure this winding check has some on it, because that's kind of a rubbery gasket material. And I find it looks a little bit better if it has a little bit of thread finish on it. Okay, that looks good. That one looks good. Little sag right here. That one looks good. Just going to make a quick adjustment. I think we got to go up just a little. That's better. I think we was going downhill just a little. Alright guys, I'm happy with that. That looks pretty good. So now we just have to let this spin for about 8 hours. And what that's going to do is just going to slow turn. And that'll make it so the epoxy has plenty of time to pop its bubbles. If you do see any bubbles, you can take a lighter from a little distance away just to create a little heat, and that will help to pop them. I never really do that, but if you do notice some bubbles, you can hold a lighter half an inch away, just enough to create some heat, and that'll help to pop the bubbles. But I'm happy with that, guys. I think it looks good. So we're just going to let that turn for 8 hours, and I'll catch back up with you and show you the finished product. Alright guys, there you have it. This is the finished rod. We're about 24 hours after I started. I took this off the turner at around 8 hours, and I think it came out pretty good. It looks good. It's nice and sensitive. This is going to be a great panfish rod, a great crappie rod. It's weighted really good with this this Black Betty Freefall. And I was just looking at the rod. Something I may do to this is I may paint the reel seat. I initially didn't think I was going to, but I think it would look pretty good. You know, if I threw some maybe Chartreuse on that, it would match the color wrap there. So that's something I may do. I'm going to hopefully maybe try to get that done in the next couple weeks. And just an FYI, I am not a master reel seat painter. I've done a few of my other open water rods, and they come out okay, but I haven't found a good top coat yet. I'm going to try a different top coat when I try this reel. But I think after I put that on, I think that'll look pretty good. But this was kind of a long one, guys. This was kind of a long tutorial, a little longer than I was hoping it was going to be. So if you guys stuck around for the majority of it, thank you very much. If you guys stuck around for all of it, thank you very much. If you guys watched 2 minutes of it, thank you very much. So we're going to wrap it up there. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you guys are looking at building your own ice fishing rod, hopefully you guys got a little bit of insight from this video. If you guys have any further questions, feel free to leave a comment. I'll try my best to answer them. If you guys didn't catch my last jig making tutorial, I walk step by step on how you make ice fishing jigs. So if you guys want to check that out, I'll leave a link in the description. But we're going to sign off for this one, guys, and we'll see you soon.